What if the stars themselves had secrets that no one else could see? Think of a sky so calm that even the tiniest glimmer of light seemed to have a message, a whisper meant only for those who would listen with their hearts. Long before people knew their own history, long before kingdoms rose or rivers carved their paths, there were beings of light who protected knowledge and whose eyes reflected eternity. These were the Watchers, angels with a job who watched the story of humanity unfold in silence. Their world didn't have the same sense of time that we do. It went on forever, a tapestry of memories, thoughts, and dreams. But even in this huge space, there were rules. There were rules about what could be seen, what could be known, and what had to stay hidden. Some angels were happy to just watch and stay quietly alert. Some people felt a stirring, a gentle curiosity, and a pull toward the world below. They looked down at the earth, a small blue and green ball that was slowly spinning in the dark. It was a beautiful, innocent place, full of life, but not yet affected by the Watcher's knowledge. There was a moment, a break in the quiet hum of creation, when the air itself seemed to shimmer with excitement. Some of the Watchers, who had questions that were heavier than the stars themselves, started to think about what it would be like to get closer to this small, delicate world. What would it be like to be among its people, to see their fear and laughter, and to know their hearts? And what would it mean to share a secret, a piece of wisdom that had been hidden away since the beginning of time? It wasn't a choice made quickly. The Watchers didn't speak out loud. Their thoughts echoed silently among the stars. Some people told others to be careful and reminded them of the order they had been in for a long time. But some people felt an undeniable pull, like a magnet, toward the world below them. They thought about the possibilities in a soft, lullaby-like way, not with the loudness of ambition, but with the quiet awe of curiosity. Some of them, especially angels whose hearts were drawn to the unseen, started to make plans. Not out of malice, but because they wanted to touch the lives of those below, even if it was only a little bit. To give them glimpses of a bigger world and bits of knowledge that had been kept secret since the beginning of time. They moved quietly, trying not to upset the balance that had always been there. The universe itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what was about to happen. The whispers of this choice that was about to be made floated over the mountains and rivers of earth like a soft wind, but no one could hear them. Instead, they were carried on the calm currents of night, a secret tune meant only for those who know the secrets of the universe. And in that song, a story began to take shape. It was about light touching the earth, forbidden knowledge brushing against innocence, and choices that would have effects for hundreds of years to come. In this quiet, still moment, the first Watchers looked down with a soft desire. They watched the people, who had no idea about the huge skies above them, the beings who watched them quietly, or the threads of fate that were still to be woven. They saw how simple life is, how beautiful morning dew is for a short time, and how strong a seed is when it breaks through the ground. And from that observation, a fragile curiosity began to grow. What would it mean to give, to share, and to cross the line that had always been sacred? As they stayed there, stuck between wanting and needing to make a choice, the night held them in its soft arms. The earth slowly and gracefully spun, and stars twinkled and distant planets shone. There was a feeling of excitement in the air, a soft promise that the Watchers would soon begin to come down, not as conquerors or destroyers, but as people who had been holding on to a secret for a long time, a secret that was ready to touch the world below. In that moment of silence, You could almost hear a whisper, soft and hard to pin down, coming from nowhere, a secret from a time when light itself reached out to people, when curiosity first stirred the hearts of people who had never known temptation. And while the earth slept peacefully under the soft light of the moon, the seeds of a story had already been planted. This story would unfold in ways that were both gentle and deep, mysterious and very human. The watchers stayed for a heartbeat longer as the first signs of possibility began to appear. They enjoyed the quiet beauty of what was about to happen, and under the huge sky full of stars, the world waited without knowing that light would soon touch it, bringing with it whispers of knowledge, wonder, and the soft tremor of choices that could never be undone. The night sky seemed to go on forever, like a huge ocean of darkness with countless stars twinkling in it. The watchers started to move from this quiet space. Their shapes glowed softly, like the gentle pulse of a distant heartbeat. They left the peace of their home behind, and the familiar light of heaven drifted closer to a world that had never seen beings like them. Each move was planned but unsure, a mix of awe and the quiet fear of going beyond what they had always known. As they went down, the earth got bigger below them. It was a sphere of swirling blues and greens, with fires from human settlements and the soft glow of rivers that caught the moonlight. Clouds drifted slowly, touching the tops of mountains and hiding valleys in shadows. The watchers moved with a grace that matched the slow rotation of the planet below. Their eyes followed every ripple of water and every curve of land, as if they were trying to remember a world that had never known them. Some of them stayed in the sky a little longer, feeling the pull of the world below and a curiosity that was almost a physical pull. They saw trees move in the evening breeze and grass fields move quietly. They saw mountains far away, bathed in moonlight, their peaks piercing the night sky, and oceans that whispered softly as they hit the shore. It was all so beautiful, but they were also a little scared. This was a world that had never heard of the things they knew. It was a world that was innocent, unaware, and waiting. As they got closer, the air around them sparkled, and a thin veil of energy brushed against their wings. They could feel the slow, steady beat of the earth and were amazed by how simple it was. There was no thought of rules or consequences for a moment, only the feeling of being there, of floating closer to a place that was so fragile and alive. They saw the little things, like a fox stopping in a clearing, the dew on a leaf, and the soft flicker of candlelight from faraway homes. It felt like every moment was bigger, like a secret was being told for the first time. But as they got closer, the whisper of duty stayed in the back of their minds. They knew that by getting closer, they were touching something holy that should not be touched. They were very curious, but they also knew the laws they had always followed. There was a quiet tension, a soft hum under their glowing bodies. It wasn't fear, but a reminder of how thin the line is between awe and sin. They started to float above the first human settlements slowly. People moved below them, not knowing that someone was watching them from above. In the distance, kids were laughing, and a soft song floated on the night air. Fires flickered in homes, but the people who were watching couldn't see how warm they were. The angels were both amazed and cautious at this moment, as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for a decision to be made. The earth seemed to react to their presence as they hovered. The night got darker, and shadows grew long and soft over valleys and plains. Even though there was no sound to mark it, the stars twinkled as if they agreed. The watchers could feel the pulse of life beneath them, the steady heartbeat of a world that didn't yet know how heavy forbidden knowledge could be. Every gust of wind and rustle of leaves seemed to remind them of the fragile balance they were about to touch. Then, As if an invisible hand were guiding them, the first watchers began to descend further, moving slowly through the trees and over the rivers. Their light dimmed to blend in with the soft glow of the night. They could feel the ground beneath them, the cool grass, and the land rising and falling gently. They were careful with every step, showing respect for the world they had chosen to enter. They were not intruders. They were visitors with knowledge they had not yet shared. They were getting closer to the humans whose lives would soon touch theirs. The night held them in its calm embrace as they watched the people below. Every move the people made was watched, not with judgment, but with awe. The first moments of interaction were still to come, but the anticipation hung in the air like the sound of a song echoing in the distance. The watchers felt destiny's gentle pull, a quiet push towards something that was going to happen, but they couldn't see it, and they hovered silently under the huge canopy of stars, waiting and watching. Their presence was only felt as a faint shimmer of light on the edge of perception. The people below didn't know what was going on. They were sleeping, walking, and going about their normal lives. Meanwhile, beings of light floated closer with a soft, careful, and endlessly patient curiosity. The night seemed to go on forever, but every moment brought the watchers closer to the world they had only seen from afar. This set the stage for the first quiet meeting between heaven and earth. The moon was low in the sky, and the night was quiet. It cast a soft silver light over the hills and forests. In this quiet, unassuming world, the watchers first got closer to people. Their light softly sparkled, mixing with the shadows of trees and the faint glow of lanterns in homes far away. People walking through the evening felt a strange sense of awe, as if the air had changed and brought with it a presence they couldn't quite name. A small group of watchers hovered near a village. Their bodies were thin and glowing, like moving reflections of starlight. They didn't talk to each other with words, because words were full of meaning. Instead, just being there seemed to say, "I'm interested in something beyond the ordinary." People stopped what they were doing and looked up, their hearts stirred by a feeling they couldn't explain or ignore. One child, who had just come out of a cottage with a thatched roof to get water from the stream, stopped when he saw a faint light in front of him. It wasn't scary or commanding. It was beautiful in a way that made the chest hum softly. It was warm and made the world feel bigger and more alive. The watchers bent down a little and looked at the child as if they were holding a delicate treasure. The child felt a strange understanding in their gaze, as if they were communicating without words across the gap between mortal and divine. As the night went on, the watchers moved quietly among the people, making sure they weren't seen when they needed to be, but letting their light brush against the edges of vision. Farmers stopped in their tracks and stared in amazement at the flashes of light across the fields. Wolves in the distance howled softly, as if they knew that something unnatural had come into their territory. Every move was slow, careful, and full of a soft reverence, as if they knew how to balance showing and hiding. Some of the watchers wanted to see how far this new connection could go. A soft whisper of thought touched the minds of people, bringing them ideas that had never been in their world before. The people felt a spark of interest and a flicker of understanding about how the stars move, how the rivers flow, and how metals are shaped. It was a soft gift, like a breeze carrying the smell of flowers from far away. It wasn't a strong command, but a gentle awakening of thought. People started to gather, drawn to the light, without really knowing why. There was no fear. Instead, They felt deeply that something amazing had changed their world. They whispered to each other and pointed to the faint lights in the shadows, not knowing that heavenly beings were leading them in their awe. The watchers watched back, their hearts stirred by the innocence and wonder of the people they had chosen to meet. They were careful to move slowly, knowing that every thought they put into people's minds would have effects on the future that they couldn't yet see. The night air felt full of possibilities, but it stayed soft, like a distant lullaby. The watchers stayed near streams, in open fields, and in the quiet streets of the village, letting their presence gently touch people's senses. Every flicker of light and whispered thought was measured, delicate, and given as a secret with the softest of hands. People felt the change in a small way, like the touch of moonlight on their skin. It was a warmth that promised understanding without asking for it. And over time, a bond began to form, not through words or actions, but through shared amazement. People became aware of a bigger world that had always been just out of reach. The watchers were a bridge, a fragile link between what could be seen and what could not be seen. They were also a quiet teacher who gave hints of knowledge that had been hidden since the dawn of time. As the night went on, the watchers pulled back a little, staying just out of sight of people, but leaving behind a soft glow in the hearts of those who had seen them. Something amazing echoed through the humans, and a new understanding gently pushed against their minds. It was enough to make them curious and plant the seeds of questions that would stay with them for the rest of their lives, even if they didn't know it. The first contact had been made under the quiet stars. The watchers had touched the world, not with force, but with soft light and quiet thoughts. And even though the people didn't fully understand what had happened, they were forever changed, because they had learned things that should have stayed hidden. The night held them in a gentle embrace, as if it knew about the quiet, fragile thing that had just happened. As the first signs of dawn began to appear on the horizon, the watchers stayed for a moment longer, watching the people go back to their lives, which now had a subtle, unspoken change in them. Their descent had begun, their interaction had begun, and the world, though still asleep in many ways, had begun to sense the presence of light and knowledge it had never known before. As the watchers stayed with the humans, the night had a quiet magic that was soft and unassuming. Their light barely touched the ground, but it seemed to be enough to wake up something inside the hearts of those who watched. They started to share bits of information slowly and carefully, not by force but by soft suggestions, like leaves blowing in the wind. One watcher knelt next to a group of villagers and showed them how to do things without saying a word. Fingers made shapes in the dirt that looked like the stars in the sky. People were amazed by how simple and beautiful what they found was, not knowing that their minds had just touched something that had been hidden from their world for a long time. They started making tools, both smooth and sharp, and they learned how to bend metal and stone in new ways. The watchers watched quietly, and the soft glow around them showed how amazed they were. Another watcher saw things moving in the air, and people started to notice patterns in the clouds, the trees swaying, and the seasons changing. They learned to read the stars like a story, to watch the skies, and to see patterns that had always been there but were hidden until now. Each revelation was quiet, like a whisper of knowledge or a gentle push to see the world in ways that had never been possible before. But there was a fragile tension in the hearts of the watchers. They knew these gifts weren't meant to be given, and that the humans were going down a path that had been closed for hundreds of years. But the pull of curiosity, of sharing the beauty and complexity of the universe, was too strong to ignore. Like a parent teaching a child to walk, each lesson was given with care, knowing how fragile both the mind and the world it lived in were. People started to gather under the soft light of the Watchers, where they learned to make things, shape things, and understand things. They learned how to work with metals, turning ores into tools and blades. They looked at the sky and learned how to follow the stars and moons and feel the universe's quiet rhythm. Some people learned to read the signs in the wind and the flow of water, to understand the small changes in nature. Every discovery was gentle, but each one planted a seed of change that would grow quietly and without being seen in the days to come. As the night went on, the first sparks of wonder began to change the way people thought. The air felt different, full of potential. The kids laughed quietly as they copied the Watchers' movements, not knowing they were practicing skills that had once been banned. Elders watched with wide eyes, their hearts full of both respect and fear. And the Watchers, who were floating silently above, felt the weight of their choice. They knew that every little thing they taught had effects that were not visible. The firelight and the soft light of the Watchers mixed together, making long shadows across the fields. People quietly experimented, turning the lessons into things they made. They shaped metal and stone with care that was similar to how the Watchers had done it. There was no chaos or force, just a gentle awakening, as if the world had been holding its breath and was now slowly letting it out in response to the new light that touched it. But even though everything seemed calm, the smallest tremors of curiosity hinted at something bigger. People started to think, to ask questions, and to picture things that had never crossed their minds before. Every thought was like a ripple, small but sure, that quietly spread into the lives of other people. The Watchers watched these ripples with quiet admiration, but they also felt a little uneasy, because they knew that the path they had opened could never be closed again. And the night held them all in a gentle hug. The Watchers' light flickered softly, and the humans' hearts raced with the thrill of discovery. The world seemed to be stuck between what was known and what was about to happen. And in that quiet, the first threads of a new age began to take shape. They were not woven with conflict, but with the soft touch of understanding and the quiet pull of knowledge that was never meant to be shared. As the sun began to rise, people brought their new skills with them into the first quiet moments of the day. They held small pieces of metal, patterns in the dirt, and shapes traced in the sky, but they didn't fully understand what they had learned yet. But a change had started, soft and unseen, like the slow flow of a river. The Watchers stayed for a moment longer, watching the first signs of change take hold in the world below. The night had gotten very dark, and a silver haze of moonlight covered the hills and valleys. In the middle of this quiet glow, the world began to change in a way that had never happened before. From the peaceful coming together of the Watchers and humans, beings of incredible power began to appear. The Nephilim were beings whose very existence had a hint of the divine, but their bodies were tied to the ground they walked on. They were huge, taller and wider than any person, but they moved slowly and carefully, as if they were unsure of themselves. The moonlight outlined their shapes and made long, sweeping shadows across the fields and woods. People who saw them for the first time felt a mix of awe and fear, as if the world had changed while they slept. There was something old in their eyes, a light and knowledge that came from a place that wasn't normal. The Nephilim walked slowly among people, watching and learning, while people watched them and were amazed. People in the village whispered to each other and pointed to the hills where these tall figures were walking. Some people stopped talking because they felt the weight of their gaze but didn't know why. Others were drawn to them, a soft, irresistible pull of curiosity and interest. There was no chaos, only the slow coming to life of a new reality. Each Nephilim had a little bit of the Watcher's wisdom, but not in the form of words. Instead, they showed it through gestures, quiet displays of skills that humans didn't know about, and other subtle ways. They easily lifted stones, shaped wood like it was clay, and worked with metals with a level of accuracy that seemed almost magical. People watched and learned without thinking about it, their minds opening to new ideas that had been hidden before. Seeing these giants was amazing, and a gentle reminder that the world had changed, even if people couldn't fully understand how yet. Some Nephilim stayed near the rivers and streams, teaching without speaking and showing people how to see the natural world in a new way. They drew lines in the stars, predicted how water would flow, and showed people how to make the most of the land's resources in small ways. People were quick to copy, and their hands shaped the earth and water with the help of these gentle giants. Every move was full of quiet wonder, as if the world had slowed down to watch this new chapter unfold. But underneath the wonder, there was a faint tension, almost unnoticeable, like the sound of a far-off wind. The Watchers who had first come down looked at their children with careful pride, knowing that every gift came with a cost. They didn't act out of fear or judgment. Instead, they quietly understood that life, in its new form, was starting to push the limits of what was possible. The Nephilim were beings of light and earth, who walked the thin line between the seen and the unseen, the mortal and the divine. As time went on, people started to gather around the Nephilim to ask for help, protection, and information. The giants' presence changed the villages in small ways, like how homes were built, tools were made, and fields were cared for. People admired their strength, copied their movements, and even whispered their own discoveries to each other. This spread the lessons that the Watchers had shared with their children in a gentle way. This way of living together had a rhythm to it that was quiet but deep, like a new pattern forming in the dance of life. The mountains and forests seemed to bend around the Nephilim to make room for their huge bodies, and the rivers showed the faint glow of their skin in the moonlight. The giants moved carefully every night, leaving no signs of trouble, just a sense of wonder. And as people became more sure of themselves, they began to accept their closeness and slowly learned to walk next to beings who were both familiar and strange. And in the quiet time between dusk and dawn, you could feel the new world's soft heartbeat. The Nephilim, who were both gentle and scary, moved in a way that carried the whispers of forbidden knowledge. People were drawn to them and began to understand the first signs of what it meant to touch the divine, even if they didn't know it. Life had changed, but not in a way that could be undone. The soft light of the moon seemed to stay longer, over fields where people and giants walked together, bridging the gap between what was and what was yet to come. The world was starting to change under the watchful eyes of these huge beings. Things that had been hidden before now sparkled at the edges of human thought. The night stayed calm, and the stars twinkled softly above. But events were about to happen that would affect generations to come. It was a story that the giants who walked softly among mortals whispered into the ears of time. The soft light of dawn spread over the valleys, warming the ground gently. People started to notice small changes in their world in the early mornings. The Watchers' calm guidance and the Nephilim's gentle presence changed their lives in ways that were almost unnoticeable but very important. Farmers learned new ways to grow crops by watching the sun and moon more closely. The rivers, which were once just small streams, became guides for planting and harvesting. Their currents taught people things they had never seen before. The watchers were close by, but they didn't say anything. They were just there, quietly watching and encouraging careful observation, allowing people to discover and create with a soft, unseen hand. As the Nephilim taught them, villages grew bigger and more complicated, and their buildings showed what they had learned. Roofs were stronger, walls were more flexible, and tools were shaped with a skill that seemed almost magical. People were amazed by what they had made, not knowing that each design had been subtly changed by the guidance of beings who had walked among them at night. In a new way, the world felt alive, as if the earth itself had started to hum a quiet song of hope. Kids learned quickly, and their little hands shaped things with interest and confidence. They drew shapes in the dirt, copied the giants' movements, and played under the soft light of the moon, learning things without even realizing it. Elders watched, their hearts filled with both pride and unease, sensing that the world they had always known was slowly growing, going beyond what they could understand. The Watcher's light brushed across the land every night, but no one could see it. People started to create, explore, and question with a new kind of energy that had never been there before. The patterns of the stars turned into maps that showed travelers where to go and when. They made tools and decorations out of metals and stones, and the way they did it was a soft echo of the giants' advice. Each work of art was a quiet reminder of the power that had come into their lives and changed society in ways that were both obvious and hidden. As people kept experimenting, they started to get together in small groups to talk about what they had learned. There was a lot of curiosity and soft talking about ideas under the stars at these gatherings. People felt trust, awe, and respect for the Nephilim, which pushed them to do things they had never thought possible before. The world was slowly getting richer, but there was still a fragile balance. People knew that this growth was being guided by hands that weren't their own. The wind's songs even sounded different, as if they were carrying hints of the knowledge that was still in the air. People's faces were lit up by the fires, which showed looks of amazement and thought. The Watchers wove invisible threads of wisdom into the land, the sky, and the tools they made, and they started to understand them. Every night, these beings' effects settled softly into people's hearts, leaving a gentle mark of what could happen when curiosity was carefully nurtured. But even though things were calm, there was still a hint of temptation. People started to feel a quiet need to learn more, go deeper, and do more than they had been shown. The Watchers watched this small movement with care, knowing that the seeds they had planted could grow into something much bigger and maybe even more complicated than they had thought. The air was full of soft potential, and the world was ready to go beyond its old limits. It was guided by light, but weighed down by the burden of forbidden curiosity. And so, life went on in the light of the stars and moon. Villages grew and prospered in peace, as people learned and changed the world with their hands and minds. There was a natural but strange rhythm to the way children, old people, and the giants themselves lived together. The Watchers were still there, a quiet reminder that knowledge had entered the world. It was delicate but strong, like a gentle current under the surface of a calm river. In the quiet of night, people felt the first sparks of questions and the soft pull of wonder that couldn't be stopped. And even though the world looked the same to people who weren't paying attention, the seeds of change had already taken root. Every field, every tool made by hand, and every look up at the stars held a hint of guidance, a faint echo of the giants and their heavenly parents. Life was starting to change, in small ways that would affect many generations to come. This was the beginning of the deeper pull of knowledge that was still to come. The night went on, covered in silver and shadow, while people stayed under the quiet watch of the Nephilim and the soft light of the Watchers. The world was quiet, but underneath it, something was starting to move. Men and women alike felt a quiet, persistent curiosity that pushed them to go beyond what they had seen. Some people walked to quiet places and looked up at the stars with big, thoughtful eyes. They looked at the patterns, the small changes in light on the hills, and the way rivers curved like painted lines on the ground. And in the corners of their hearts, a new question began to take shape. What else was hidden, just out of reach? Fear and need didn't drive them. Instead, they felt a soft, irresistible pull toward understanding and knowledge that had never been offered before. The Watchers, who were floating above, saw these movements. Some people felt a quiet sense of pride, picturing the spark of discovery glowing in people's minds. Others were unsure, feeling the need to keep a delicate balance of restraint. They knew that every thought they planted and every small lesson they shared had a huge impact. Still, they couldn't fully resist the gentle urge to share more and show glimpses of truths that had been hidden for a long time. People started to try things out by the rivers and in the fields. Simple tools became complicated, and small discoveries led to ideas about how to craft, shape, and bend the world around them. They thought about the cycles of life, the paths of the stars, and the forces that guided existence. The giants stood still, their huge shapes lit up by the moonlight, and people felt the quiet presence of wisdom brushing against their thoughts, as soft and delicate as a breeze through leaves. People in villages and open fields talked about new ways to do things. People shared small pieces of knowledge about metals and stones, learning how to shape them into beautiful forms that went beyond what was needed. Some people learned how to watch and guess the tides, the growth of crops, and the seasons changing. Every change was soft and almost unnoticeable, but each one left a faint shimmer of wonder in the air, a soft echo of heavenly influence that stayed long after the Watchers were gone. And with these lessons came a new, quiet, and patient hunger, the desire to go further and learn things that had been kept from them. People started to ask questions they had never asked before, to look deeper into patterns, and to wonder not just how things worked, but why they did. Every night, the urge to understand the world's hidden connections grew stronger. It was a subtle but constant pull toward the forbidden. The Watchers watched closely, their bodies bathed in the soft light of the moon. Some told them to be careful and hovered silently, as if to remind the humans that the line they were getting close to was fragile and sacred. Others couldn't help but let the faintest whisper of hidden truths touch their minds, just enough to spark new thoughts, new interests, and new possibilities. The air felt full of possibilities, quietly buzzing with the sound of secrets that had not yet been found. Kids, who weren't afraid and were curious, were the first to try things out boldly, shaping stones and metals in ways that adults were too scared to. Their hands moved with natural accuracy, guided by the unseen teachings of the giants. They carried the first hints of power that went beyond the ordinary. Adults followed, inspired by the bravery and creativity they saw. They slowly entered new knowledge that had once been off limits, their hearts full of both awe and soft doubt. And through it all, the night stayed calm. The stars twinkled softly above, the rivers murmured quietly, and the wind carried the faintest shimmer of something old and unseen. People felt the first gentle thrill of knowing more than they had before, the first quiet awareness that there was more to the world than they had known, and that they couldn't fully understand yet. People had changed quietly by the time dawn came. Thoughts that had once seemed impossible now stayed with them, guiding their hands, shaping their hearts, and pushing their curiosity even more. The desire for more knowledge had taken hold, like the soft glow of the moonlight fading into the first rays of the sun. It was subtle, gentle, and persistent. And in that fragile balance, the watchers hung around for one last moment before fading away from human awareness. The people had felt the whisper of something amazing, the pull of truths that had been hidden before. Even though they didn't fully understand what they had touched, they were forever changed. The world had grown bigger in small ways, and the first signs that the path of knowledge would spread out and change lives, societies, and the generations to come were about to appear. The mornings had started to look different, soft and golden, as if the earth itself had woken up to small changes. People moved through their villages and fields quietly, following lessons that had been whispered to them on moonlit nights long ago. Something had changed, but it was hard for someone who wasn't trained to see it. Kids drew patterns in the dirt that looked like the stars above. Their laughter had a strange but calming rhythm that was like a small echo of the knowledge that was starting to spread around the world. Elders saw how precise their hands were as they shaped stones and metals. They were in awe, but there was also a quiet sense of unease, as if something bigger was going on that they didn't understand. Tools became more complicated and were made with care and purpose. Axes and knives shone with a smoothness that had never been seen before, and even the simplest tools had a touch of art to them. People used to just use the rivers to get food, but now they studied them, measuring and tracing their currents to figure out when the seasons would change and when crops would grow. People started to live in sync with these rhythms, unknowingly weaving the effects of celestial knowledge into the fabric of everyday life. The Nephilim walked among them, silent but obvious, their huge bodies casting soft shadows over the fields. They showed how to combine strength with precision and power with thought by using gestures instead of words. People watched, learned, and copied, slowly picking up skills that had once been too hard for them to learn. Every day brought small changes that made villages more creative and amazing places. The air at night even felt different, with a faint energy that made people want to be creative. Fires flickered longer, casting shadows on faces that were focused on making and shaping the world around them. Families got together to watch each other's experiments and quietly talk about what they found. The watchers were still there, a soft glow at the edge of consciousness, reminding people that their growth came from things they couldn't see. But there was a hint of tension under the calm. People began to feel the first stirrings of ambition as they realized what they could do. Their curiosity, which had once been gentle, now pushed lightly against limits. They tried out different tools and metals, as well as ideas. They looked for patterns in the sky and thought about what they could do with the knowledge they had. Their minds went further than they knew, dancing on the edge of the forbidden and drawn to possibilities that hadn't yet shown their effects. The wind carried the faintest whispers of progress as it blew through villages and over fields, hinting at the slow but sure change in society. People started to plan things out more carefully, using observation, trial and error, and instinct. But they were always aware of the giant's presence. The land seemed to respond to them in small ways, Crops grew well, with careful care. Waters flowed as if they were being guided, and the earth itself seemed to give more easily to the hands of those who had begun to learn its secrets. The changes were clear even when things were quiet. Kids walked with more confidence, and adults stopped to look at patterns in nature that they had never seen before. Fires reflected in eyes that had begun to dream beyond the ordinary, and the watchers, who were invisible, felt both pride and worry. They knew that every small change was a thread in a tapestry that was getting more complicated every day. Nightfall was a time to think, a quiet break in the rhythm of change. People stayed under the stars, drawing constellations, playing with metals, and sharing their discoveries with each other in whispers. The Watcher's quiet influence and the Nephilim's presence had turned curiosity into ability, wonder into skill, and watching into doing. The first signs of change were clear everywhere. In every village, every field, and every heart that had felt the quiet touch of something they didn't understand. And as the land was bathed in the soft glow of the moon, people began to feel a quiet thrill, a soft push towards something deeper that promised even more understanding. They were walking more confidently. Their hands were more skilled, and their minds were sharper. There was a quiet tension in the air, and the whisper of ambition brushed against the edges of their minds, hinting at the next stage of discovery and the subtle appeal of knowledge that had once been off limits. In the early mornings, a soft mist covered the valleys and fields, making them look like they were covered in silver. People moved with a new sense of purpose during these quiet hours. Their steps were measured but full of meaning. What had once been simple curiosity turned into something more planned, a quiet drive that lay beneath the calm surface of daily life. They played with metals, making tools that were both useful and pretty. Stones turned into blades, plows, and decorations, and each one held a hint of what the Watchers had taught them. But the hands that worked were guided not only by memory, but also by imagination. A quiet, soft desire to see what else could be done. The giants watched, their huge shapes visible in the fog. As humans reached their full potential, people started to work together in new ways, forming groups to solve problems. Plans grew out of simple cooperation. Small projects grew into bigger ones, and each success brought the quiet thrill of having done something. There was no rush or loud announcement, just the soft flow of work and discovery that moved through fields and villages like a soft current. The rivers used to be just guides for crops, but now they are also mirrors for people's hopes and dreams. They learned about balance by watching how water flows, and they learned from the quiet strength of its currents. They used these lessons in their own lives. The moonlight shone on the surface, showing the small changes in both the land and the mind. The trees even looked like they were bending a little toward the energy of people working hard. Their leaves whispered secrets of patience and accuracy. Kids played near the edges of the woods, trying out different shapes and patterns, and copying the Nephilim's movements without even knowing it. Adults watched, feeling a mix of pride and doubt. People were starting to realize that the gifts they had received and the knowledge the Watchers had given them had opened up doors to possibilities they had never thought of before. Their dreams were still soft, but they had the soft hum of change, a promise that life was moving into a new rhythm. At night, people thought and talked quietly. Fires flickered softly in the village squares, lighting up faces that were deep in thought. People talked about what they had done, like small victories, and the complicated designs of tools and buildings. The Nephilim stayed close by, a calm reminder of how hard it is to find the right balance between inspiration and restraint. The watchers, who were always just out of sight, watched with quiet patience, knowing that this growing ambition could change the world. But there was still a small amount of tension under the calm. People started to think about what was beyond what they already knew. They wondered if the rules they had followed so far could be broken, and if the skills they had worked on could be used in places that were once off-limits. The quiet desire was like a gentle breeze that moved thoughts and dreams, drawing them toward things that had always seemed impossible. The ambition shone like stars on calm waters. Even in the quiet of night, people started to act with more confidence. They moved on purpose and did bolder experiments. Simple tools turned into complicated machines, and patterns in the dirt turned into small designs and buildings. There was a rhythm to their work, a quiet dance of hope that went through the villages, bringing people together in the search for subtle mastery. The world had changed in small ways, thanks to the Watcher's gentle gaze and the Nephilim's quiet presence. Life went on in a soft way, but the threads of ambition had been pulled tight. People were starting to think they could do more than they ever thought possible, and they felt a soft thrill at the edges of their minds. There was no chaos, no loud announcement. Instead, there was only the steady rise of desire, ambition, wrapped in calm determination, and the soft echo of possibilities that shone just out of reach. As dawn painted the hills in soft shades of pink and gold, people felt a gentle stirring in their hearts, a quiet readiness to go further, to try new things, and to embrace the possibilities that the moonlight and the eyes of giants whispered to them. The rise of ambition was not loud or quick. It was a calm, steady tide that changed the way people lived and got their hearts and minds ready for the first small problems that would test their new skills. The nights had gotten longer, and the moon's soft light made silver paint over fields and villages. People, who were now quietly skilled and subtly ambitious, started to think about what they had done. The Watchers' lessons had guided their hands and minds, but every time they made something new or found something new, they had questions that stayed in the back of their minds. They thought about the choices they made in a quiet way. When they shaped metals into tools or decorations, they started to think about not just how they worked, but also what would happen. Is it possible for a tool used for making things to also hurt people? Could knowledge that is meant to help people live be used for other things? These questions weren't loud. They were like soft ripples in pools of thought that reflected the moonlight. The Nephilim moved quietly among them, casting long shadows over fields and villages. Their presence was a quiet reminder of power tempered with care. People watched them and felt the weight of responsibility. They understood, in a subtle way, that the powers they had now had effects that went beyond their immediate use. A plow that could work the fields faster might also break up delicate patterns in the ground. A sharpened blade might be able to carve wood perfectly, but could it also be used in ways that weren't meant to be? Doubtful whispers spread through villages like a soft breeze. Families gathered around fires to share what they had learned, and every story made them think. How far should they go? Which lessons were safe to follow, and which might go too far because they didn't understand the rules very well? The Watchers saw these quiet arguments and knew that the line between guidance and temptation was thin, but they decided to let people feel their own moral stirrings. Children could even feel the first signs of choice. They were hesitant to try out new tools and watched each other with cautious interest. Some tried and learned how good it feels to succeed. Some people stopped to think about whether what they were doing could have effects beyond what they meant. In these small moments, the first seeds of moral thought took root. They were small but strong, and they changed how people would deal with knowledge and the world. People started to push the limits in small ways by rivers and under trees. They tried out different metals, fire, and patterns in the land. Each move was planned and careful, like a soft dance between being curious and being careful. But there was a quiet push toward deeper understanding inside them, a gentle thrill of possibility. They felt the weight of responsibility, even if it was just a gut feeling. This awareness began to guide their choices in a careful way. The night air carried these quiet currents of thought, moving through the villages and over the hills. Things that people made were no longer just tools. They were ways of showing thought, intention, and quiet judgment. Every time I shaped, built, or looked at something, I thought about what was right and wrong. The watchers' lessons stayed in the back of their minds, a soft voice reminding them to be careful, but they were still free to choose their own moral paths. Some people were drawn to the idea of having more power. It seemed like the subtle knowledge they had been given promised more than just immediate usefulness. It suggested that they could control things in life and the world that had been out of reach before. But they stopped, even if they didn't know it. The moral weight of their choices was there, a quiet counterbalance to their ambition. Their hearts weighed each action, thinking about how it would affect the fragile balance of human life and the giant's larger impact. People struggled with these problems even in quiet fields or under quiet, starry skies. They tried things out carefully, knowing that every action had both a chance and a consequence. The first signs of moral awareness had appeared, fragile but clear, like the first light of dawn over misty hills. Their desire, which had once been just curiosity, was now mixed with conscience, gently guiding them as they moved forward in the slow unfolding of knowledge. As dawn broke, painting the hills with soft gold and pink, people began to explore the limits of what they could do on purpose. They had learned how to enjoy making things, how exciting it is to find new things, and how heavy it is to think about what is right and wrong. The first moral problems had begun to shape their minds and hands, setting the stage for decisions that would have a lasting effect on their lives, pushing them closer to the subtle temptations and challenges that awaited them in the story of forbidden knowledge. The moon hung low over the quiet valleys, making the villages and fields look silver. People had become skilled and confident thanks to the Watcher's lessons and the Nephilim's quiet presence. Their curiosity, which had been mild at first, grew into ambition, and with ambition came the first signs of misuse. It started with little tests. People did things like sharpening a blade too much, adjusting a plow in a way that hurt the soil, and shaping metals for beauty, but not being careful with them. These things weren't done out of malice. They were done out of curiosity that went too far. Every action had a soft thrill, the pleasure of being in charge, and the gentle pull of pushing limits. But even though things seemed calm, the first signs of trouble began to show. Kids played with patterns in the ground, changing the way natural flows worked by shaping fields. At first, the changes in the soil and water were small, but they kept happening. They whispered to each other, wondering if the thrill of learning new things had started to change the balance of the land. The Nephilim moved quietly nearby, their tall bodies showing worry even as they let people explore. People started to plan their nightly get-togethers more. People talked about their discoveries and shared their experiments. Their voices were soft, but full of quiet pride. But now there was tension, and their actions were a little hesitant. Some people wondered if a tool or a design could hurt someone if it was used wrong. Some people were interested in the opportunities it offered and pushed the boundaries of what they knew. It was hard to tell the difference between careful use and misuse, and these small acts started to make it even harder. It looked like the rivers even noticed the change. Currents changed slightly, where people dug new channels or changed banks, showing the small imbalance that their actions had started to cause. Some crops did well, while others struggled because of the careful changes made to boost yield. People felt the first hints of what would happen, but their curiosity pushed them on, soft and strong. The watchers watched these times with soft restraint. They saw that people could make things carefully and make mistakes without meaning to. The quiet lessons they had left behind were now being tested in ways that were not fully allowed or not allowed at all. Every mistake, no matter how small, had an echo that would spread through society, showing that knowledge could be a fragile gift or a quietly dangerous one. Kids also liked having power. They shaped small stones and metals, played with fire, and were fascinated by what happened as a result of their actions. A flame would sometimes burn the ground, a tool would chip unexpectedly, or a pattern would fall apart under its own weight. These were the first lessons in knowing when to stop. Small signs of misuse that weren't meant to hurt anyone but were meant to learn. But they also had the soft beginnings of consequence and the first hint of the balance between knowledge and self-control. Villagers also started to notice small changes in each other. People talked about pride and worry, sharing their findings with excitement, but also being careful to notice how they affected others. One place's misuse of a tool could make someone more careful in another, and the soft rhythm of experimentation now had a hint of reflection. People were learning not only how to change the world, but also how to see the effects of their changes. Even the Nephilim felt the first tension in their calm guidance. They looked at villages for a long time, watching people as they balanced skill and mistake. They had taught enough to keep them alive and help them grow. But the way they were misusing what they had learned showed how easy it is to cross the line between learning and going too far. But the Watchers did not directly intervene. Instead, they let humans deal with these small problems and learn in the slow, immersive way that comes with discovery. As dawn broke and soft pink light spilled over hills and valleys, the first signs of imbalance became clear. Streams changed a little. Fields didn't always produce as much, and people themselves started to feel the weight of responsibility, along with the excitement of making things. In quiet, soft ways, they were learning that knowledge was important, and that the first signs of misuse, no matter how small, would have a big impact on the story of their world. The nights had become quieter, but there were still small changes happening in the villages and fields. People moved around their creations with new skill, shaping metals, stones, and soil with their hands. But even in this soft rhythm, small echoes of what would happen began to show up. Faint ripples that carried lessons that weren't said, and effects that weren't seen. When the banks were changed, the rivers moved a little, with the water flowing more slowly in some places and more quickly in others. Crops that used to grow evenly now had uneven patterns, with some doing well and others struggling because of small changes. People noticed, softly and almost unwillingly, the imbalance they had created. This was the first gentle proof that knowledge and action were linked in ways they didn't yet fully understand. The Nephilim watched in silence, their huge bodies lit up by the soft moonlight. They noticed the humans' small mistakes and the quiet stirrings of consequence. But they only stepped in with a gentle presence, a reminder that sometimes learning happens through experience instead of instruction. The watchers were close by, and their eyes showed both patience and a little worry. They knew that every ripple, no matter how small, was the start of a delicate chain of cause and effect. Whispers moved through the streets and fields of the villages like soft wind. Families quietly shared their thoughts, saying that a tool used carelessly could do more harm than good, that fire could burn as easily as it warmed, and that a design, no matter how clever, could upset the land's natural rhythm. These were not disasters or loud warnings. They were soft lessons and nudges that helped people become more aware of their responsibilities. Even kids, who are playful and curious, could hear these soft echoes. A stone that is out of place could change the way a stream flows, and a pattern in the soil could change how plants grow. Their laughter had a hint of caution, as if they knew that every action could have effects that went beyond what they planned. But in this gentle test, they learned not only how to do things but also what would happen as a result. This changed their perception in a way that would help them in the future. The night fires softly lit up faces, making thoughts that were full of reflection. People started to see the connections between what they wanted to do and what happened, and between being curious and being responsible. Every little thing had a consequence, even if it was small. This gentle awareness seemed to fill the air, bringing the soft weight of unseen effects into every conversation, every shared experiment, and every quiet moment by the river. And this awareness brought with it a soft tension. People thought that their hands, even though they were skilled, moved with invisible threads that connected them to the world around them. The knowledge they had gained, which had once been a source of wonder and growth, now had faint hints of responsibility and restraint. Every tool, every experiment, and every small change to the natural order served as a reminder that even the smallest actions could have effects that weren't immediately clear. The Nephilim's presence stayed calm but strong. Their shadows covered the fields, watching the people work. They weren't judging them. They were just aware, as if they were silently teaching the value of being mindful. The watchers, who were just out of sight, knew how important these small effects were. They knew that part of a larger education that couldn't be forced or rushed was learning to sense and respect them. At dawn, the land seemed to reflect the quiet thoughts of the people. The streams took different paths, the fields grew unevenly, and the soft wind carried a hint of what was to come. People felt it in their hearts, an unspoken, delicate understanding that their actions had consequences and that curiosity and skill were always linked to responsibility. The whispers of consequence were soft but constant, shaping thought and intent without getting in the way of the soft rhythm of life. And when the first light of morning hit the hills, people stopped to think in silence. Their hands rested on tools that had just been made. Their eyes stayed on patterns in the soil and water, and their hearts felt the first real weight of cause and effect. The gentle ripple of consequence had begun to weave itself into their daily lives, a soft yet undeniable presence that would guide their choices and prepare them, slowly and quietly, for the challenges and decisions that lay ahead in the unfolding story of knowledge, ambition, and restraint. The morning mist hung softly over the valleys, gently touching the fields and rivers. People moved through their villages with quiet purpose, carefully shaping tools and soil with their hands. But the small changes they had made earlier had started to spread farther than they knew, reaching nearby settlements and even the land itself. A small change in one village, like a slightly different irrigation channel or a tool that was carefully sharpened, now changed the flow of rivers and streams downstream. Crops in faraway fields reacted in different ways. Some did better than before, while others had trouble with small changes in the soil and water. People watched these changes with a mix of curiosity and quiet amazement, not knowing how much they affected them. They felt that their actions, which had only been in their own hands and villages, were starting to spread out like soft, invisible threads. Families talked quietly around the fires about what they saw their neighbors doing. One village's quiet success inspired another to do the same, while the small mistakes of another served as gentle lessons. People started to realize that the things they made and the choices they made had effects that went beyond the immediate. They affected other people in ways that were subtle and not always seen. The awareness grew slowly, like the first light of dawn painting the hills. It made me feel both proud and uneasy. Kids learned these lessons by watching older people and neighbors and copying their gestures and patterns. As they played, they quietly spread their influence by shaping small stones, twigs, and soil in ways that were similar to how adults carefully did experiments. The land itself seemed to be alive, responding to every human touch and every curiosity that was pursued. The trees leaned a little toward the sun, the rivers moved very slowly, and the winds carried faint whispers of change through the villages. The Nephilim watched from the edges of the forests, their shapes blending in with the shadows of old trees. They saw the humans' quiet power spreading out and affecting more lives and lands than the humans themselves knew. They were calm but alert, a gentle reminder that even the smallest actions could have big effects. The watchers stayed at the edge of perception, knowing that the slow growth of knowledge and its misuse were starting to change the way people lived and connected with each other. The spread of power was clear, even in quiet fields and clearings lit by the moon. A new tool that was tested in one village made its way to another. A small change in irrigation changed the way the soil looked far downstream. People started to realize that they weren't the only ones experimenting, that their hands, thoughts, and curiosity had effects that went beyond what they could see right away. This awareness grew slowly, with a soft hum of responsibility, as if the earth itself was quietly reminding them that they were all connected. Social ties also changed slowly. Villages started talking to each other more, sharing ideas and techniques. At the same time, competition started to grow in the form of imitation and improvement. People's quiet ambitions now affected groups, changing how they acted, what they chose to do, and what was most important to them. The ripple of human action spread quietly, connecting villages and people in a web of influence that was fragile, invisible, but still very real. Under the soft light of the stars at night, people could hear the whispers of their growing power. They felt that their hands had made more than just tools and fields. They had made connections, patterns, and expectations. The quiet spread of influence was like a gentle current beneath the calm surface of life, pulling people toward thinking, being responsible, and, eventually, the soft tension of choices that had to be made. The hills and rivers showed the signs of this growth by dawn. Streams flowed in slightly different ways. Fields had patterns that were both planned and unplanned, and people were moved by the realization that what they did affected more than just their own lives. The quiet power they had was not something to be dealt with harshly. It was a gentle, constant presence that shaped people's thoughts and the rhythm of society as it changed. As the first light of day spread across the valleys, people stopped to think about how their growing power felt for the first time. Their curiosity and ambition had started to reach beyond themselves, weaving into the lives and lands of others. This planted the seeds of moral, social, and environmental consequences that would shape the gentle flow of time and the unfolding story of how people interact with knowledge, power, and responsibility. The sun slowly rose over the hills, painting the morning mist with soft streaks of gold. People walked through their villages and fields with a new awareness, a quiet feeling that what they did had more meaning than they had thought. Every tool they used, every pattern they made in the dirt, and every experiment they did was no longer just a sign of skill or curiosity. It was a thread in the delicate fabric of life that went beyond what they could see. Elders stopped to think in the soft light of dawn. They thought about how their creations changed things in small ways, like how rivers changed course, crops grew unevenly, and the land changed in small ways. Even little mistakes that had gone unnoticed before now seemed to echo softly, like the faintest vibration on the surface of a calm pond. They started to feel a soft sense of duty settle in their hearts, a quiet pull that reminded them that every choice they made was important. Kids also had this awareness while they played. They started shaping stones, twigs, and dirt on purpose, using the lessons they had learned without even knowing it. They kept a close eye on the results of their actions and how even small changes affected the world around them. The laughter in the fields had a reflective quality now, a soft curiosity mixed with the quiet realization that their hands could do more than they had thought. People in the villages changed the way they talked to each other. Now, when people talked about discoveries and techniques, they also thought about what would happen next. Families talked quietly about the ripple effects they had seen in nearby settlements, being careful to share their thoughts. People felt both pride and wonder as they began to see the invisible threads that linked their choices to the rest of the world. The Nephilim watched from the edges of hills and forests without saying a word. Their huge bodies cast long, quiet shadows, but they didn't get involved. They were a reminder that strength and knowledge should be tempered with awareness. And people were starting to see the same lessons in their own hearts. The Watchers, who were just out of sight, saw that people were starting to reflect on things more. They knew that the increasing weight of choices was a natural step forward, a gentle way to get ready for the challenges that lay ahead. People started to stop more often, feeling the gentle pull between being curious and being careful. They thought about not only what could be done, but also what should be done. Simple experiments turned into chances to think, and every new discovery made me wonder how it would change the world outside of our hands. There was now a rhythm of thoughtful action that moved quietly through the villages. It was a mix of the subtle appeal of progress and an awareness of what would happen. It seemed like even nature was responding to this new care. The streams flowed gently, acknowledging the careful changes. The leaves rustled in the soft wind, and the fields showed a delicate balance between growth and intervention. People felt the harmony or the delicate disruption they had caused, and their hearts felt the weight of responsibility in a quiet, almost holy way. As the moonlight shone down on the valleys at night, people thought about things in silence. The fires flickered softly, lighting up the faces of people who were deep in thought. They had felt the quiet weight of choice that came with the subtle power of knowledge. They felt the weight of their role as both creators and observers, as every action and choice was a note in the story of life that was unfolding. People had slowly gotten used to this weight by the time dawn came back. It wasn't a burden. It was a quiet friend who reminded me that every hand that shaped the earth also shaped the future. They started to act with care, balancing their curiosity with caution and their skill with reflection. The increasing weight of their choices was a quiet guide that helped them learn more about themselves and the world around them. It also prepared their hearts and minds for the quiet temptations and tests that lay ahead in the story of ambition, power, and restraint. The moonlight made the valleys look silver and cast soft shadows over fields and villages. People, now aware of the weight of their choices, felt a new and quiet sensation, stirring within them a subtle allure of power. It wasn't loud or pushy. It was a soft pull, like the sound of a river over smooth stones, promising things that were beyond what I could understand right away. They saw how their hands could mold stone and metal, and how water and fire could bend to their will. Every tool made and every pattern traced seemed to have not only skill, but also power. The people were proud of what they had done, and that pride sparked their first gentle curiosity about what else they might be able to do. What could you do with this information? How far could they go with their skills? Families sat around fires and talked about new experiments and discoveries. Their voices were soft, but there was an unspoken interest in the power to control behind the words. A new tool might not only change the shape of a field, but it might also change the flow of a river. A pattern in the soil might improve harvests, which could have an effect on life outside of their own homes. People started to feel like they were part of a quiet process that was shaping the world. The feeling was both exciting and fragile. The kids could even feel it. Their fun experiments with rocks, sticks, and water now had a soft sense of effect. They were interested in how people reacted and saw how small things made small changes. It was a natural part of learning, but it also sparked the first faint glimmer of desire. The desire to see how far influence could go, and to understand the weight of subtle power. The Nephilim watched quietly from the edges of the woods. Their huge bodies cast shadows over fields lit by the moon, a calm reminder that strength and skill came with being aware. The watchers, who were just out of sight, saw the quiet stirrings of temptation in people. They didn't get involved. Instead, they let the gentle pull of power take hold on its own, knowing that people must learn to control themselves through thinking, not through punishment. People started to experiment in small ways, trying to see how they could have an effect that was barely noticeable. A tool moved a small part of the ground in a different way, and a carefully built channel changed the direction of the water just a little bit. They watched the ripple effects and took note of the results with a sense of quiet satisfaction and thoughtfulness. The thrill was soft, like the way branches move in a calm wind. It was mixed with the pull of curiosity and the lure of power. This quiet change started to show up in social dynamics. People in villages talked to each other more on purpose, paying attention to each other's work and methods. People who were good at certain things noticed that their neighbors respected and paid attention to them, which made them feel like they had some say over decisions and practices. It wasn't direct control or spoken ambition. It was a quiet, all-encompassing awareness of how much one could do just by being skilled, knowledgeable, and careful. People thought about how their skills were getting better at night when the stars shone on rivers and rooftops. The quiet appeal of power wasn't a loud call. It was a whisper in the heart. They felt the fine line between the joy of creating, the duty of choice, and the subtle urge to guide, shape, or change. Every action and choice had a potential that went beyond what was immediately clear, suggesting both risk and opportunity. By morning, people knew about the soft tension inside of them. They could feel the soft pull of influence in everything they did every day, and they were quietly curious about how far their skills could take them. It taught them how to be patient, observe, and think about things. It got them ready for the small temptations and moral choices that would quietly shape their society and interactions in the future. The power's subtle pull had taken hold not as a threat, but as a soft guide, a friend to knowledge and skill. It was a whisper that called people to explore, think, and think about the quiet effects of every choice. It planted the seeds for the next gentle stirrings of temptation that would ripple through the story of curiosity, morality, and the growing power of people. The air at night was calm and soft, with the soft rustle of leaves and the quiet hum of crickets. People walked through their villages and fields, with hands that had learned how to do things and minds that were aware of how their past choices had affected them. But under this calm understanding, a new feeling began to stir. A soft, almost imperceptible temptation that gently urged them to look into the options for personal gain. It started out small. A neighbor could finish a job faster than a tool that was carefully sharpened. One family might get more grain from a new plow than another. The thought was brief, almost innocent, but it stayed with her like the soft light of the moon on a calm stream. People were curious and hesitant at the same time. They were aware that there were now choices, and that they could choose ones that would be good for them if they wanted. Families talked about what they had found and what they did every day around the fire. The talks were calm and thoughtful, but there were some quiet comparisons. With a hint of pride, one might say, "Our field grew a little bit more this season." Someone else would quietly point out how a neighbor's design was different. These small observations carried an unspoken temptation to use skill not just to shape the land or the tools, but to gain advantage, to subtly change the outcome in their favor. Even kids, who are playful and watchful, could feel the gentle pull of this new awareness. When they played with sticks, stones, and running water, they saw that making a small change could lead to a better outcome. The thrill was quiet and soft, like a whisper that made you realize how one small thing could change the outcome. It taught me about control and possibility, showing me the fine line between skill and desire without saying a word. The Nephilim moved quietly along the edges of forests and hills, their bodies blending in with the shadows. They watched the humans' quiet temptations with calm patience, knowing that choice and curiosity would naturally come up. The watchers, who were just out of sight, saw the first signs of moral reflection, people starting to question what they could do versus what they should do. Neither of them stepped in. The lessons were to be learned through experience, slowly and gently, in the flow of everyday life. People started to try out small temptations, a channel that was slightly changed to favor one crop, a tool that was used to get something done faster than another, and a group of stones that were placed to make things easier rather than out of necessity. Each act was small and almost unnoticeable, but it still had the faint echo of choice and power. There was a soft current beneath the surface that pulled at curiosity, pride, and the quiet desire to do well. The rivers flowed softly past the fields that people had made, reflecting the moon's flickering light in the stillness of the night. The land seemed to take in the subtle thoughts and plans of people, carrying whispers of both careful planning and small self-interest. The trees swayed gently in the wind, as if they knew how hard it is to find a balance between creation and desire, growth and temptation. People knew without saying anything that every choice they made had effects that went beyond what they could see at the time. Even in their hearts, the quiet stirrings of temptation were gentle, like a soft hum under the calm. Pride, curiosity, and desire mixed together in subtle ways, putting gentle, almost invisible pressure on decisions. People felt the thrill of possibility and the quiet chance of personal gain, but they were also aware of the consequences. which were soft and long-lasting. Every action, no matter how small, brought both pleasure and thought. As the sun rose and warmed the hills, people started to make small decisions under this gentle pressure. Some chose to help themselves in a subtle way, while others chose to be careful. The first seeds of quiet, understated personal ambition had been planted. These choices weren't loud or disruptive, but they were the first steps toward a moral rhythm, a gentle awareness that every action, no matter how small, could have effects on people and places in ways that were both obvious and hidden. And as the morning fog settled over the fields and rivers, people went about their day with more awareness in their hands, hearts, and minds than ever before. The first gentle temptations had come. They weren't loud and demanding, but rather quiet companions to curiosity and skill, teaching small lessons about choice, influence, and the fine line between desire and responsibility. The morning mist hung softly over the hills and valleys, as if the land had taken in the quiet movements of the night. People walked through their fields and villages with a calm purpose, carrying with them the lessons of curiosity and temptation. But now, the small decisions made when they were first gently tempted began to have effects beyond their own lives, affecting the lives of others and the rhythm of the land in subtle ways. A stream that had been carefully redirected to benefit a single crop pushed the water flow further downstream. Seeds that were soaked in extra nutrients sprouted a little earlier in a nearby field, while others had a harder time with less. The people quietly watched these changes and thought about how their actions were linked to the results. It was a gentle awakening, a whisper of cause and effect that flowed through the world like moonlight over a river. Families talked about their experiments with their neighbors in low voices around fires, sharing their small successes and the unintended effects of their work. The talks were soft, thoughtful, and almost like a dream. One family noticed that a tool that was changed for convenience made their work go faster, while another family noticed that the same change changed patterns in the fields nearby in a small way. Every story and every observation had a faint echo of influence spreading outward, quietly connecting people and places. Kids also felt these echoes while they played. A stone rolled in a slightly different way, and a small mound of dirt moved under careful hands. Suddenly, the ripple reached the edges of their imagined world. They knew that even small actions could have effects that weren't immediately clear. The excitement of trying new things was now mixed with thinking, a soft balance between curiosity and awareness. The Nephilim hid in the shadows of forests and hills, where their huge bodies blended in with the night. They saw the fragile web of influence growing between people and understood the slow rhythm of learning and consequence. The Watchers, who were just out of sight, saw how small acts of ambition and subtle temptation were starting to change how people acted, what they did, and what they were aware of in the villages. There was no need to step in. The world was already teaching the quiet lessons of ripple and reflection. Even nature took part in this quiet dance. Rivers carried the soft traces of changed flow, bending to what people wanted and did wrong. It seemed like trees, fields, and hills were responding in small ways. Each leaf and blade of grass seemed to be in perfect balance. The world whispered that every choice counted, and that the quiet echo of one action could affect lives far away, changing things in ways that people could only feel, not fully see. People began to stop more often, to think about how far their actions could go. The soft echo of small choices became a rhythm in their daily lives, a gentle pulse that reminded them that their choices always had an effect. It ran through social interactions, fields, and families, gently shaping choices and behaviors with soft, constant guidance. People felt a heavy sense of responsibility in their hearts for even the smallest choices. This tension grew as they became more aware. At dusk, the villages were alive with a quiet awareness. People saw how one action could change things in small ways, how curiosity and temptation could work together to make small waves of change. They knew that every tool, experiment, and small change had an effect on their world, both in ways that were clear and ways that were not. The echo of choices was now a living rhythm, a quiet friend to skill and thought that taught people to watch, think, and act with care. As night fell softly over the hills and rivers, people lay awake in silence, feeling the faint but undeniable effects of the choices they had made earlier. The echo of small decisions had started to spread across the land, linking people and nature in a fragile web of cause and effect. It was a slow, gentle awakening that got hearts and minds ready for the lessons of responsibility, consequence, and accountability that would quietly unfold in the days to come. The soft morning fog hung over the valleys and fields, wrapping the villages in a quiet hug. People went about their daily tasks with a new sense of awareness, feeling the fragile threads that linked what they did to the lives of others. The first gentle temptations had left small marks, and now the echo of those choices began to teach lessons about being responsible, soft, reflective, and slow to show themselves. A small change to a water channel had made one crop grow more than expected and another crop grow less than expected. Families saw these changes, but they didn't get angry or judge them. Instead, they thought about them calmly. People talked around fires and in quiet corners of the villages about how even small actions could have effects on people they couldn't see. This realization wasn't loud or scary. It was a quiet lesson that taught people that responsibility and influence go hand in hand. Kids learned these things on their own. They saw how one careful move could change the path of a small animal, or the way a stone rolled across a stream while they were playing. The results of actions were no longer just ideas. They were real, gentle changes in the world around them. Every choice started to mean something, a gentle push that made people think and look before they did anything. The Nephilim stayed at the edges of forests and hills, where their presence served as a calm reminder to be aware and hold back. The Watchers, who could only see from the invisible realms, saw that people were starting to understand the quiet rhythm of consequence. People didn't have to follow these lessons. They were slowly found out through experience and thought, by seeing how one small action could have a big effect on the unseen threads of life. People started to take more breaks and think about how each choice would affect them. They knew that having knowledge and skills gave them both the thrill of success and the quiet burden of responsibility. Even the smallest change, like moving a stone, changing the course of a stream, or making a tool, could have effects beyond the area right around it. Awareness grew slowly, like the mist in the morning that lifted to show fields and rivers, changing hearts and helping people make decisions. This growing awareness was shown in social bonds. Neighbors told each other stories and shared what they knew, not to show off, but to help each other see how actions and outcomes are connected in small ways. Families started to be more careful and pay attention to how their actions affected others as well as what worked. Reflection was a part of daily life, and people quietly learned that accountability was not punishment but awareness, a gentle companion to skill, curiosity, and intent. It seemed like nature itself was responding, recognizing that the people were paying more attention. The streams flowed in a subtle harmony. The trees bent slightly in the wind to show they were listening. and the fields had patterns of growth that showed they were being cared for. People felt a quiet connection to the world around them, as if every choice they made and every action they took had an effect that went beyond what they could see right away. The lessons of being responsible weren't strict or harsh. They were soft and almost whispered, helping people think and make decisions in a gentle way. At night, people sat by fires with calm hearts and talked about their small successes and the unexpected things that happened. The stories made you think, and the tone was soft. They quietly wove together lessons that helped people understand without judging. They felt the light weight of responsibility settling into their minds, like a friend who would help them make choices in the future and teach them to think, watch, and act carefully. People understood the rhythm of responsibility for the first time as the moon shone silver light on valleys and streams. It wasn't a voice that told people to do something or scolded them. It was a quiet presence that connected hearts, minds, and lands by threading through choices and their effects. Every action, no matter how small, had its echo, and people felt the gentle push to act with care, learning the soft lessons of responsibility that would quietly shape the story of their lives as it went on. People had learned the soft lessons of responsibility, which led them to a deeper understanding of choice and consequence. And as night fell over the villages, people lay still and thought about the quiet truth that every action, every choice, and every gentle influence had an effect on the world around them in small, lasting ways. The night fell softly over the villages, covering rivers and fields in silver light. People moved quietly, knowing how heavy their past choices were. But there was a familiar feeling, soft and subtle, like a whisper of temptation that brushed against the edges of their thoughts. It wasn't loud or demanding. It was a soft hum in the heart that brought back memories of things that had once been thought of, but not acted on. It started with little things, a tool that was slightly changed to give an edge, a method of caring for crops that was improved to favor one field over another, or a whispered suggestion made during a quiet conversation. Every action had a small pull of influence, and people felt the familiar mix of curiosity and desire. But now, with the lessons of responsibility gently etched into their minds, they stopped to think about the effects of each choice. Families sat around flickering fires and told stories about their daily lives. They said that pride and reflection were mixed together. Someone would say softly, "The stream flowed differently today," and "The crops beyond our fields thrived unexpectedly." Another person would respond in gentle wonder, "Maybe it was the choices we made yesterday." The conversations were calm, but there was a quiet tension of temptation underneath them. The subtle realization that knowledge and skill could change outcomes, even if only a little. Even the kids could feel it in their quiet play. A mound of dirt moved around, a small stone moved along the path of a stream, and a careful change in their games all had the soft thrill of power. But the reflection was there, a whisper that reminded them that everything they did affected more than just the people around them. The pull of temptation, though soft, was now met with awareness, and the mix of curiosity and care made a rhythm of careful experimentation. The Nephilim moved quietly along the edges of forests and hills, their huge bodies blending in with the shadows. They watched how the lessons of accountability affected the choices people made when they were tempted. The watchers hovered just out of sight, watching the delicate dance of desire, curiosity, and reflection. They knew that the gentle stirrings of temptation were necessary for growth, as they taught people how to be aware and how their actions had small effects. People in the villages tried and thought about small acts of advantage, A well-placed tool might save time, but the person stopped to think about how it might affect the land and neighbors. There were some small experiments done with both excitement and thought. The heart had to balance the soft pull of power with the soft voice of duty. It was a gentle dance, a quiet acknowledgement that every action could have hidden consequences, and people felt the tension in a calm, thoughtful way. Even nature seemed to reflect the quiet pull of desire. The moonlight made the streams shine as they flowed past stones that were moved by gentle hands. The wind whispered through the leaves, hinting at changes to come. Fields reacted gently to small changes, showing that people were becoming more aware that even small actions had an effect on more than just the immediate area. The world itself seemed to whisper and echo that the soft pull of temptation held lessons that needed to be learned. By dawn, people had carefully thought about how to deal with the gentle pull of temptation. Some were sneaky and pushed the limits, while others held back and thought about what they had learned about being responsible. Every decision and every small test became a note in the steady beat of moral thought. People knew that the soft whispers of temptation were not enemies or friends. Instead, they were teachers, helping people think and observe, bringing attention to possibilities, and reminding people of the consequences of their actions. As the morning mist settled over the fields and rivers, people moved with calm awareness, aware of the fine line between curiosity and restraint. The whispers of temptation were no longer just a call to desire. They were a mirror of understanding, a soft presence that asked the quiet question, "What will your choice become as life goes on?" The morning light came through the fog in a soft way, making the hills and rivers look like they were covered in gold. People walked slowly through their villages and fields, carrying with them the quiet lessons of curiosity, temptation, and responsibility. It was a quiet morning, but beneath the calm, a soft turning point was happening that would slowly change how they acted and how their days went. Small decisions started to show clear patterns, a careful adjustment in one area of the field, a better technique in another, and a quiet observation shared with a neighbor. These actions, which were once separate, now hinted at a growing rhythm. People started to see that one small choice often led to another, creating a chain of events that had an effect on their lives in ways that were soft yet undeniable. People talked about things that made them think around fires and water wells. One might say, "Our tools seem to work better when we place them carefully, but the field next door changes too." These gentle comments were not meant to show off, but to show how small actions and choices can have big effects. People were starting to realize how their actions were connected, and that one action could never completely control another. Kids, who were playful and observant, saw similar patterns in their games. A small change in a stream changed the direction of the water, just enough to change the path of leaves that were floating. A stone put in the right place could change the direction of a ball that is rolling. These little experiments taught us to think ahead by showing us that even the smallest choices can have big effects. The joy of trying new things was now mixed with a quiet thought about what would happen, a soft beat that would guide their hearts and minds. The Nephilim watched from the edges of forests and hills, where their huge bodies blended in with the shadows and mist. They noticed that people were changing in small ways. Patterns of behavior were forming from the quiet times when they faced temptation and responsibility. The watchers, who were out of sight, saw how minds slowly changed, how people became aware that having power meant having responsibility, and how people began to realize that patterns could help them make decisions in the future. People started to act more purposefully. Not only was a carefully sharpened tool used for speed, but it was also used for consistency. A small change in a channel took into account the effects downstream, and subtle changes in planting showed that people were becoming more aware of the results. The way people moved was slow and careful, like a dance that was shaped by thinking, watching, and being aware. Every action became part of a gentle pattern that taught people to pay attention to how their hands and hearts affect things. The land even reacted. Rivers mirrored soft light as they wound their way gently past fields that had been well cared for. The branches of the trees swayed in the wind, casting soft shadows over the paths people walked on. Fields had patterns of growth that were made by careful hands, just like how human thought changes in small ways. Nature itself seemed to echo the quiet realization. Actions, big or small, create patterns that go beyond what we can see right away and shape the rhythm of life with quiet authority. By the end of the day, people could see these patterns not just in fields and rivers, but also in their relationships and social ties. Words were chosen with care, decisions were made with thought, and small acts of influence were noted quietly in observation and reflection. There was no big change. It was more of a quiet turning, a soft alignment of thought, behavior, and consequence that suggested an early understanding of morality, society, and subtle influence. As night fell over valleys and rivers, people lay still and thought. The soft turning point had come. A gentle realization that choices mattered, that patterns could help people make decisions in the future, and that influence needed to be handled with care once it was noticed. The rhythm of life had changed in a way that was hard to notice, getting hearts and minds ready for the slow growth of moral understanding, social connection, and human awareness.